Now, we have hazards. There are many hazards that you'll have to look out for whilst driving, so here's the lowdown on most of them. Now there's planetary hazards and faction-based hazards. First, the planetary hazards. Before we start, there are patterns in the planets that I've noticed which I've taken to calling areas. Areas are certain zones of the map that are generated in a specific way that are similar or the same as other areas of the same type, even if it's on a different planet. An example of an area is what I've called the Rocky Ponds. It's characterized by ponds with rocks in and around them. Each mission map will typically be made up of two area types, with one being dominant and the other one being very sparse, usually around the edges of the map or dotted around it in clumps. Every planet type has 2 to 3 area types, which get mixed and matched for your missions. Some area types are shared across planets, even ones that aren't directly related, such as the Rocky Pond showing up on desert planets as well as lunar planets. Some planets have special features that don't fit into the definition of areas that I've laid out, like the rock spires on lunar planets. Most planets are essentially alts of each other, so I'm going to group them together. Some are more like siblings, in that they're the same with minor differences, and others are more like cousins, in that they're very similar in many aspects but different in others. I'll rate each planet as easy, normal, and hard. Easy planets are generally something beginners can easily work with. Normal planets require a higher level of skill or use of advanced strats like anti-flip to function well on. And hard planets require advanced strats and a high level of skill/awareness to consistently survive on. The last thing to note is that the community has come up with its own set of names for these planets called biomes, which I was unaware of when I wrote this script and I won't use because most of the names aren't descriptive of the planets. Looking at you, Boneyard. Sure, there's bones, but that doesn't accurately describe what the planet type is like, so it's not helpful unless you're in the know. So yeah, I'm using my names. I'll have the community names on screen so you can search them if you'd like. First up, Rocky Planets. Rocky Planets are a generally low difficulty planet type with 2 different area types, which will be the main ones you'll see. The Rocky Fields and the Mushroom Fields. These areas are very similar and bleed into each other in most cases, but they are distinct. The Rocky Fields area has open fields with small rocks strewn throughout them, with occasional larger rock formations that have mushrooms around them. Mushrooms, if disturbed by being shot or by being ran over directly, will knock your car off balance, so try not to have them hit the side of your car. Overall, since the obstructions are few and far between, navigation in this area is very easy. The mushroom fields have far more densely packed formations of small rocks, ditches with mud in them which is slippery, and mushrooms are everywhere. This obviously makes navigation harder, but it's still within the beginner's range of difficulty. Before we move on, I noticed that big bushes spawn in this area alongside the mushrooms. So if you see bushes, then you know it's a mushroom fields area. The last main area type is the Rocky Spires, which feature tall rock spires that can be difficult to navigate with occasional non-area of interest bombs lodged in the side of them. These typically aren't the main area type of the map, but sometimes nearly the whole thing is this area, so be prepared for that possibility. The edges of the map on these planets can have normal terrain extend beyond the normal playable area, like on most planets, oceans with beaches or cliffs along one edge of the map, or it can spawn as an island which is completely surrounded by water with beaches. There are 2 regular variants of this planet which are almost identical. They both have the same areas, with the main difference between them being that the Rocky Meadow has rain as a modifier, which can majorly hurt visibility at night. And the Rocky Crimson has ion storms, which disable stratagems and the map. This can be a non-issue or a crippling detriment depending on the situation. Difficulty-wise, they both get easy, but the ion storm one will naturally make the red version of this planet a bit harder. There are 2 related planet types. The first is the Rocky Woodland, which is roughly the same as the prior 2, but it can't spawn as an island. Instead, it features trees, grass, and an occasionally blinding sun during sunrise. The trees only spawn in the rocky fields area, so it's far easier to notice if it's a mushroom fields or not. This one is on the same level of difficulty as the previous two. The scorching sand planets are the other related planet type. Now they may seem drastically different from the others, but they share the same base composition once you look closely. There's a rocky fields area, a mushroom fields area with dead shrubs rather than regular bushes, and a rocky spires area, all of which are formatted exactly the same as the other planets. There are, however, no islands, beaches, or cliffs on the edges of the map. Instead, it has dead trees, sandy terrain, and fire tornadoes as a modifier, which obstruct movement when active. You may think, I can just stem through a fire. This is true, but your car can also get set on fire. It's considered a big entity, so fire affects it more severely than you the player, to the point that being set on fire a few times will do the car in. As a result, driving through the fire tornadoes is not advised other than in emergency situations. Due to the slippery terrain coupled with the density of rocks, other flipping hazards, and fire tornadoes, I'd say this is a hard planet type which you should hold off on taking on until you're an experienced driver. Next, desert planets. Desert planets have sandy terrain, so the ground is more slippery than normal, meaning you'll have a slight adjustment period when traveling here. It's hot during the day and cold during the night, affecting your heat-based weapons and stamina. The main area type is what I call the desert dunes, where, well, it's dunes like you'd find in a desert, with the occasional rock here or there. If you full throttle off a dune, you will likely flip forward and explode. Instead, you need to simply let go of the accelerator as you approach the tip of a dune, and it'll jump in a more stable fashion, and you'll usually land on your wheels. The next area type is a somewhat cluttered rocky area, with obstructive rocks that make navigation like that of a maze, with some especially tall rock formations which will block off portions of the map. The last area type is the rocky ponds, which was mentioned before. It features a series of small and large ponds, with some being big enough for deep water. They also usually have rocks in and around them. This area is actually like a smaller version of an area I'll go over later, where the main strategy for navigation is either drive onto land in between them, or slow down as you enter and exit them. Though if they are deep ponds, then you either need to avoid them, or switch to drive one as you go through them. The main differences between these planets are that they have differing weather effects, and one lacks a special large rock formation, while the other possesses one. The sandstorm desert planets have no unique rock formations, which ironically make it unique. They also have sandstorms which obstruct your vision. Tremor's desert planets, however, have tall rock formations that are mirrored on lunar planets. These rocks jut out at an angle, up and away from the ground. The other thing to note about these planets is that they have tremors, but since they don't affect a car, they aren't a concern normally. I rate the Tremors deserts as easy, and the Sandstorm deserts as normal, due to the sandstorms reducing visibility to near zero. Although, the terrain remains fairly simple, so with some skill and patience you can overcome the sandstorm. Just go slow and take your time. Next, cliff planets. These are a relative to desert planets because they also have the same desert dunes, rocky ponds area, and rocky area. The main difference is that these planets feature tall, rocky cliffs that arch outwards as a special feature, and also have tremors, but as discussed before, they are a non-factor. The sister planet for these are the acid planets. They are the same, but with more rounded large cliffs, bad lighting which is hard to see in, and acid rain which makes your car more vulnerable and further hurts visibility. Despite the visibility tending to be poor, cliff planets are still easy difficulty. The frequent acid storms, however, make acid planets normal difficulty. Next, lunar planets. These are relative to Tremor's deserts, also featuring sandy terrain, a rocky area, a rocky ponds area, and the same large rock formations. The crater ocean, which is the signature area of this planet, is like a larger version of the rocky ponds. The area is littered with craters, which you'll have to navigate by slowing down as you enter and exit each individual crater. The other area types are identical to the other sandy planets, so there's no need to retread. The last thing to mention is there's meteor showers, where meteors will randomly hit the area. It isn't much of an issue, as long as you're paying attention to lit up areas on the ground and just avoid them. If your car is parked, however, during a meteor shower, then you'll have to watch it. The meteors will pop your wheels or destroy your cars outright if you let them land nearby. Overall, difficulty-wise, I think this is a normal difficulty planet type due to the craters coupled with the sandy terrain. While you're getting used to things, the craters will pose an issue, but after you're experienced, it will be of little concern as long as you don't drive recklessly. Next, icy snow planets. These planets are covered in snow, which is slick much like sand, meaning you'll have less grip and your top speed is lower. Sometimes ice spawns as well, which requires you to learn an entirely different way of driving, as mentioned before. Now this planet is unique because it has 2 regular areas and 1 special one in the form of the icy glacier. But before going over that, the main area type for this planet is the snowy plains, which is mostly flat terrain with occasional hills, rocks, and dunes like on desert planets, which, fun fact, are called snowdrifts. If you can handle desert dunes, then you'll be able to handle this area. The next area type is called the Ice Flower Valley. The main 2 features of this area are the titular ice flowers and rock walls that present opportunities to practice impromptu wall riding. When it comes to the ice flowers, on foot they eat your stamina and slow you, as well as the enemies, but in the car, it doesn't have much effect. The only thing to note is that they do damage on contact, which means they can pop a wheel or outright end the car if it's low enough. The damage they deal is low, so it shouldn't be a top priority, but they should be avoided if possible. The last 2 things to mention for the Ice Flower Valley is that there's tall mountains that will frequently appear, cutting off portions of the map, and there's frequent large gashes in the ground that can be trouble if you're not paying attention. Now we have the Icy Glacier area. It's made up of large ice lakes with icebergs separating into a sort of maze. One thing you'll have to look out for in this area besides the ice is the very frequent bombs that spawn lodged in most of the smaller icebergs. Sometimes they're close enough that they can chain explosions, which is particularly an issue on the automatons since they have ranged weapons. As mentioned prior, ice flowers also spawn in this area on the snow. The thing that makes the Icy Glacier special is that if a city is present, then they cannot spawn at all. Now with all of that gone over, the maps on this planet are either a full piece of land with the occasional lakes, or it's islands separated by bodies of water, connected by thin strips of land. Falling into the water can sometimes be unsalvageable on this planet, so try not to do so. The last thing to mention is the blizzards, which reduce visibility just like sandstorms with all the same things applying. Difficulty-wise, it's a hard planet due to the ice, blizzards, and a myriad of other things you need to keep up with. Though if you're patient and you master driving on ice, then it drops in difficulty to about the same level as sandstorm desert planets, but slightly harder due to the extra hazards that need to be accounted for. Next, rocky snow planets. These planets are a cousin to icy snow planets due to them sharing the Ice Flower Valley area. This planet, however, has no snow, no ice, and no blizzards. The 2 area types which are unique to this planet are more or less snowless snowfield area, which I've dubbed the Rocky Fields, creative I know, and a toned down version of the Ice Flower Valley called the Rockwall Cluster. The reason the Rocky Fields is distinct is because it lacks the snowdrift, so it's mostly flat inclines. The Rockwall Cluster, on the other hand, lacks mountains, ice flowers, and the gashes in the earth, so navigation is a cakewalk. The way that the map can spawn is the same as snowy planets, so there's no reason to retread. Since this planet lacks so many of the elements that make the other one difficult, I rate it as easy. Next, jungle planets. These planets are covered in tall trees which make it hard to navigate, act as flipping hazards, and reduce the effectiveness of eagles because of their height. The trees alone will make it so that you'll want to have anti-flip mastered at an instinctual level if you want to operate here. This planet's two main area types are the jungle hills and the deep jungle. In the jungle hills, the trees are very spread out with lots of hills and rocks. As a result, the main obstacle is verticality rather than the trees, unlike the deep jungle, which is more or less what you'd expect from hearing this planet's name. Lots of trees that are close together, which tend to be flipping hazards. The last area type is the marsh area, where the ground level's out to be flat with water covering the surface. There will be occasional islands with trees on them, but for the most part it's just a free ride. What you'll have to watch out for though is the lakes/rivers. The marshes can randomly drop off into them, but there is a way to tell beforehand. Either look at your map and make sure the area ahead is dark green rather than light green, or just look ahead and if you see a lack of trees then it's likely deep water. On these planets, usually drop-offs in the deep water are steep, so it's likely you won't be able to recover if you do fall in. The last thing to mention for the area types is that sometimes fire stumps spawn very rarely in deep jungles and marshes, while commonly spawning directly outside of objectives. If shot, they set the immediate area around them ablaze, doing a decent amount of initial damage followed by fire damage. Do not be near these around enemies that can shoot at you. The key to easy navigation in deep jungles are paths, which seem to spawn independent of area type, and will just cut through them as seen in this marsh area. They are lightly marked in regular terrain, but this is a good example of a path isolated. These make navigation in deep jungles really easy, since it's an open route to travel upon, though if you veer off the path, then navigation gets tricky again. The paths will intersect with each other, making it so that you can just go from path to path in deep jungles, but with enough skill you won't even need them. The last thing to mention about paths is that they aren't exclusive to this planet type, but since most planets are so open, they don't really come into play. These planets also feature large rock/tree formations that separate large swaths of the map as its special feature. The last thing to note is that there are occasional rainstorms, which slightly lower visibility, but other than that they are non-factor. The sibling planet for these are dark jungles, which are far darker and feature fog. It's more or less just a lower visibility version of the regular jungle planet, so it's a bit harder. Overall, these are a hard difficulty planet type, though if you can mitigate the flip hazards and learn to navigate using paths, then it's demoted difficulty-wise. For the last of the normal planets, we have forest planets. These are by far the hardest of the normal planets to drive on due to a lot of factors. As the name implies, it's covered in forests. The main area type are the forest areas, which are incredibly dense with trees. I'll come back to this area type later, but to be brief, you need to be precise with your movement in order to navigate these areas fluidly. Now when it comes to the non-forested areas, there's two. One is a grassy field area. It's mostly open space with occasional rocks and trees. There's a few hazardous areas which are what make this planet type hard. Firstly, there's spike plants, your main op on this planet. These plants spawn exclusively in the field areas and look like an incredibly short tree, with large spiky balls covering it. If you run into them, or they are shot, they will explode outwards in all directions. If directly ran into, the spikes will either kill you, pop a wheel, or destroy your car if it's weak enough. The thing with these plants is that they're everywhere, and most of the time you may not see them until you're right on top of them, so it's very easy to just run into them. On top of that, certain versions of this planet type have spike plants that blend in with the grass and the sky, so it's even harder to identify them. As a result, even as an experienced driver, you'll need to be permanently on guard while in or near field areas. Even a second of letting your guard down can result in a wrecked car. Trust me, until a few months ago, it still happened to me regularly, because it's hard to stay focused the entire mission. The main bright side is that spike plants mainly spawn near rocks and other plants, so if you avoid those, then you can mitigate the threat somewhat. Another hazard that spawns in grassy field areas are bombs. On some forest planets they spawn rarely, and on others, like gray forest planets, they spawn everywhere. And what makes things worse is that spike plants can sometimes set these off. So you may hit a spike plant, get off mostly fine, and next thing you know you're blown to Kingdom Come. The last hazard to note is death holes that don't really directly threaten your car, but they emit steam that obscures other hazards. The last area type is the rocky field, where there's far less open space in favor of large rocks. They aren't large enough to utterly redirect you, but it's enough to divert you slightly. There's also a lot of smaller rocks which you'll have to navigate over and around, but they aren't too much of an issue. Spike plants still spawn here, but they seem more rare, and the other two hazards in the grassy fields don't seem to spawn here from what I've seen. Circling back to the forest area, it's really a test of your ability to quickly know where your car can fit, while also going in the direction you want to go. If you can't do it fast enough, then you'll run into a tree or a rock, and then you'll have to back up, slowing your pace down. Once you get your navigation abilities down, then the forest area ceases to be an issue, even turning into an area you'll prefer over having to deal with the threat of spike plants. When it comes to the different types of forest planets, there are 4, with the main differences between them being the color of the grass, the sky, the trees, the spike plants, and the different modifiers. The modifiers are one where there's none at all, volcanic activity, which is just a reskinned meteor shower which leaves fire behind, ion storms, and fog. Most of them are more or less interchangeable, but the hardest planets to drive on are definitely the gray variant, which I found is an entirely different planet type. The reason I say this is because the forest area is entirely different, and its frequency of bombs in the field area is absolutely insane. The forest area here is almost entirely tall trees, which are more spread out, but in turn there's more rocks and bushes that act as hazards instead. Other than that, they're just a different version of a forest area. Going back to the field area, the spike plants look gray in certain lighting, so they end up blending in with their surroundings. Though the main issue with the gray forest planets is the absurd amount of bombs that can be set off and destroy your car. Like, as you can see in this clip, they tend to spawn everywhere, sometimes even being able to chain detonate, so you need to be extra alert. Due to all this, these planets are labeled as hard, and their difficulty barely even drops until you hit a certain level of experience. Next, we have cities and megacities. Cities and megacities are designed for cars, so they're fairly easy to drive on, with the main obstacles in regular cities being abandoned cars and fire hydrants that, when ran into, will knock you off balance if you hit them wrong. Abandoned cars act like a solid wall at high speeds, and when disturbed will explode after a few seconds, sending you flying if you're still close. Either navigate around them, or slow down, drive over them, then make sure you get out of range once you initiate their self-destruction. Fire hydrants act akin to mushrooms on rocky planets, so as long as you hit them straight on, you won't be knocked on your side. I would say, though, it's probably best to just avoid them entirely. These are probably some of the easiest areas to drive in, with the main resistance being other cars, ironically enough. The only exception being terminated city variants, which I will talk about later. A side note I'm going to insert here is that there are non-area of interest resupply areas that show up frequently inside of cities. Some will always have resources when you find them, but others will only have them some of the time. This can help if you're in a pinch and need to max out on everything when resupplies are unavailable, or if you just need a quick top off. The last thing to note for regular cities is that across all factions there seems to be a separate patrol timer inside of these. Typically there's only one patrol spawned every X amount of seconds, but inside or near cities there seems to be a second patrol timer which spawns stationary patrols. They'll typically sit still while occasionally wandering around, which allows them to catch people trying to stealth around them. Typically they spawn at intersections or at choke points, so they act as walls which need to be dealt with in order to keep going that way. They also seem to spawn closer to you than regular patrols, sometimes being as close as 50 meters when they spawn, rather than regular patrols where it's 100 plus meters. Since this is the case, it's probably best to get in, do your damage, and get out of the city, because the game will probably not relent with the patrols. With megacities, there's 6 variants. 3 for when each faction is attacking, and 3 for when they have the planet under their control. The attacking variants are mostly identical to each other, with very minor variations, but the controlled variants are where the major differences lie. But before going over that, I found recently that megacities have at least 2 area types. Downtown and the park. Downtown is where all the tall buildings are, and will usually be a majority of the megacity maps. It's also where most of the special parts of controlled megacities spawn. The park is a more open section which looks like, well, a park. And from what I've found, it seems like this area is devoid of the special parts of controlled megacities. The bug-controlled megacities are covered in this light green fog, which can obscure visibility, but the main threat this enables are random death holes that are more than big enough to fall into with the car. They only appear on areas that aren't the main road, so if you want to completely avoid these, then stay on the main road, and slow down whenever you go off of it. The automaton megacities have an odd feature. There's oil in some areas that are off the main road, which acts kinda like ice. Usually this is only going to cause a momentary slip, but when seconds matter, it can really screw you up. Again, the main way to avoid this is to stay on the main road. Lastly, we have the Illuminate-controlled megacities. Aside from the obvious Leviathans permanently being around on anything above a level 5, there's these weird Illuminate structures hanging off the sides of buildings. They explode violently when you run into them with the car and can very easily kill you, so avoid running into them. The things sticking out of the street are just normal destructibles. One weird thing that all controlled megacities share is that destroyed cars on the road explode when disturbed. Like regular cars. I have no idea why this is a thing, but you should be aware of it. The last 2 things to note are that the city patrol timer is permanently in effect since the whole map is a city, and if the area between 2 buildings is too thin, when you call in your car, it can... yeah. This has happened to me multiple times. Firstly, for the special planet types, we have Magma worlds. Unlike the planets that will be covered next, these worlds are more akin to normal planets. This is because they have 3 area types and don't have anything like the caves. It's still a special world though, since cities can't spawn here, and automatons are the only faction with these planets. The first area type is the Basalt Fields. It's akin to the rocky fields from the rocky snow planets, but its small rock formations are far more densely packed, and magma can occasionally spawn in puddles. On foot, running on magma instantly sets you on fire and will very quickly lead to your demise. In the car, however, there's a grace period of about 1 to 2 seconds before your wheels get set on fire. Once a wheel is set on fire, then it will pop. There's nothing you can do to stop it. Once the wheel pops, the car will also be set on fire. The car in general cannot last very long in magma, so be sure to avoid it as much as possible. Another hazard that is in this area are the magma geysers. They'll occasionally erupt, setting the area around them on fire. The way you can tell is that your controller will start to rumble and you can see lava bubbling inside of it. The range is pretty small on the fire surrounding them, so as long as you aren't on top of them, they aren't a threat. The next area type is called the Basalt Mountains. They're akin to the mountainous sections of snow planets with large basalt formations blocking off sections of the map. There's also a lot of verticality, which means you'll have to contend with that as well. From what I can tell, there's no magma geysers in this area, and the magma puddles only spawn on the edges near magma rivers/lakes. The last area type are the Basalt Trenches. These are like the opposite of the mountains in that you descend downwards into trench-like structures, surrounded by walls of basalt. There are occasional crevices with magma inside of them, but the geysers are absent, with the puddles still being relegated to the edges of the area. This area has some extra depth to it though, because bases and objectives that spawn inside of it also spawn in a lowered position. So if you can navigate the tops of basalt walls, you can get the high ground. Anyways, the basalt walls can sometimes spawn really close to each other, which would normally be untraversable with the car. That is, unless you know how to wall ride. Gets more relevant with every planet added. Anyway, circling back to the lava rivers / lakes, trying to cross them is not a good idea. Instead, there's occasional automaton bridges which you can use to safely cross them. The nice thing is they show up on the map so you can plan your routes ahead of time. The last thing to note about this planet type is that the intense heat modifier is always in effect, so the heat-based weapons are permanently at a disadvantage here. Due to all of this, mainly the magma being such a big threat, I rate these as a hard planet type. In comparison to forest planets, these are around the same level, if not slightly harder. Lastly for now, we have Hive worlds. These terminid-infested abominations have two outside area types, which are more or less amplified versions of other planets' area types. There's the extreme dunes, which is amped up desert dunes, with more or less the same applying, with the main difference being some of the dunes can be so big you literally can't drive up them, so you'll have to drive around them. The extreme marsh, on the other hand, is like an amped up marsh from jungle planets, except that instead of islands with trees on them acting as obstructions, it's rock formations that are fairly spread out compared to normal marshes. The main thing to note is that, on foot, the water is high enough in some areas that it slows movement. This also causes you to be unable to dive in said areas. Though the main concern with the car is that sometimes when extract is in this area type, it will be a small platform with water surrounding it. When this happens, there will always be an extremely deep pit of water on one side. It seems random, so you should always be ready to shift into gear 1 when approaching this extract type. Now the big thing is the caves. They're an interesting case because they're more akin to cities in that they have the stationary patrol type with that separate timer. But unlike cities, they're decently difficult on their face to navigate smoothly. In general, the caves are made up of terminid terrain. I'll go over it more in the faction section, but to be brief, the terrain is designed to obstruct and generally be hostile to you. There's random bumps and grooves as well as acid mines, which are their own headache, which I will also go over in depth in the faction section. The general protocol is to keep your speed down to a manageable level, especially if you see acid mines. This naturally correlates to your level of skill, so you'll need to be the judge of what manageable is. As for the cave specifically, there's frequent obstructions like stalagmites jutting up out of the ground, as well as stalactites hanging from the ceiling which can reach ground level. The former of which can be ran over, though when you do, they'll interact with the car strangely. There's red spiraling plants on the ground as well, which have two variants. The small ones can be run over no problem, but the big ones have two stages. If they're untouched, then when ran into, they'll stop you in your tracks, but afterwards they'll shrink. While they're shrunk, you can run over them again to destroy them. This is also how trees on forest planets operate. So your options for dealing with them is to hit them twice, meaning you'll get damaged, avoid them, which takes time, or use heavy ordnance like the Quasar to destroy them, which also takes time. Now when it comes to how caves generate, it seems like there's a few different variants of rooms with small caves connecting them. For instance, there's this bottomless pit room, which will be very frequent. It has a bottomless pit with a bridge over top of it. This bridge can collapse if an exosuit walks on it, a big enemy walks on it, heavy explosive is used on it, or if your car falls onto it. If your car drives onto it normally, then it won't collapse. But if the terrain isn't properly aligned with it, and has your car falling onto it, the momentum of your car will destroy it. So if that weird terrain generation happens, then avoid that bridge and go the long way. There's a couple other rooms which aren't really worth going over because there isn't much special about them. Most of the objectives also have rooms which are usually surrounded by a bigger room. From a top-down perspective, it's like a smaller circle within a bigger circle. There tends to be 1 to 3 entrances into the objective, so you'll usually have to circle it until you find an entrance. Once you do, I would recommend not taking the car inside of it. Instead, try to find the lowest traffic area you can imagine inside of the external room to park. This is because if the car isn't parked well, then chargers will usually wander into the car and destroy it while you're away. Last thing to mention about the cave specifically is that there's occasional openings to the sky, usually near or inside of main objectives, which allow you to call in stratagems. If you call in something like supplies, it usually won't deploy directly where you placed it. Instead, it'll fall at the nearest valid location. Vehicle stratagems, on the other hand, will sometimes not deploy unless you place it in a really open area. So if your call-in gets eaten, then that's why. The reason why I put such emphasis on the caves is because dragon roaches are outside of them, so you'll want to spend most of your time in the caves to avoid dealing with them. I'll go over why in the faction hazard section, but to be brief, they also have special AI for the car. The only way to avoid them and not take damage is to be going at high speeds and then turn hard when you hear them go for a strafing run. Otherwise, it's a guaranteed burn on the car and or you. So knowing how to traverse the caves is important, and to sum it up, it's about instinct. Utilizing the skills built up on normal planets and normal terminated terrain to be able to make snap decisions you don't have time to deliberate about. So if you lack those instincts, you will struggle here. With all of that considered, this is definitely the hardest planet type in the game, meant for only the best drivers out there. A small extra section I'm adding before we move on is map reading. Before dropping in, you can actually read the map and see what area types will be in the upcoming mission. This is actually what allowed me to identify some of the trickier area types I was having a hard time seeing. I've managed to identify most of them, so here's a sort of key for them. Bear in mind, if the planets share area types, then all of them will look like what I'm showing, even if the colors make it hard to tell. First up, the rocky planets. Small rocks or nothing at all means it's the rocky fields. Bushes means it's the mushroom fields. And big rocks means it's the rocky spires. For desert planets, the bushes are visual noise. Ignore them. Nothing at all means it's the desert dunes. Rocks means it's the rocky area. And this weird, splotchy discoloration on the ground means it's the rocky ponds. Now for lunar planets, the blank areas are instead the crater ocean, rather than desert dunes. Icy snow planets are next, and I'll point out a discrepancy you'll see when you get a city map. If you get a city map and a snowy field generates, then sometimes it will be completely flat land, and it'll appear blank on the map. It's really weird, but it's a thing that I've noticed. Anyways, if you see ripples on the ground, then that means it's a snowy field. If the ground is blue, then it's an icy glacier. And if it's blank, but with big rock chunks, then it's a ice flower valley. Rocky snow planets have the same tells for the ice flower valley and the rocky field, but if you see ripples and there's rocks inside of it, then it's a rock wall cluster. The city generation thing also applies to these planets. Next, jungle planets. Now the marsh is easy because you just look for water with trees in it. But the deep jungle and the jungle hills are harder to distinguish. The jungle hills will have pockets without trees in them, whereas the deep jungle is just trees densely packed together. I'm not joking, that is the only tell the jungle hills has. Next, the forest planets. And it's really easy for these. Densely packed trees is the forest area. A blank area with occasional trees is the grassy field. And an area with rocks is the rocky field. Next up, the megacities. The square boxes with trees in them are the park, and the tall buildings are downtown. Now I'm sure you've noticed the brown patches with short buildings on some of these. I'm not sure if these are an area type or not, but when I've investigated them, it just seemed like more downtown sections, but I could be wrong. Next up, Magma Worlds. If it's blank and flat land, then it's the Basalt Fields. The rocks signify the Basalt Mountains, and the divots in the ground are the Basalt Trenches. Lastly, for now, we have the Hive Worlds. If there's a tannish section with occasional bones, then it's the Extreme Dunes. And if it's a bright yellow looking section with rock pillars sticking out, then it's the Extreme Marsh. Now you may be asking, why did he teach me this? Well, if you're good enough with the car, then it won't matter what's in the upcoming mission, but if you're still learning and you see a map like this, well, you can decide, I don't think I'm ready for a mainly rock spires map, or I don't have the patience for dealing with this area type, and choose to bring something else rather than the car. Knowing the limits of your own skill or patience is not a sin.